Sonic is so vast in terms of literally everything. Story, video games, art, characters, music, I could go on. There's so much in this franchise that people are interested in. So as a result, not only has it caused it to gain a super large and dedicated following, but a following of many different kinds of people. Now, a downside to this large following is that sometimes you can't satisfy everyone. Some people aren't going to get the Sonic game or Sonic media that they'd like to see. However, an upside to this large following is that there's a bunch of talented people in it. Artists, animators, writers, music creators, and game designers, some of which decide to make their own vision of Sonic purely out of the passion they have for the franchise. And thanks to Sonic Team's genuine encouragement of this, we've got a load of incredible fan work. It's gotten to the point where Sega has actually hired these people to make their stuff. Comics, music, animation. I've done this bit about 2 times, so. And video games, which is the subject of today's video. Some of the fan games I've played are some of the best Sonic media I've ever consumed. I'm not even kidding. Most I don't even get to talk about in this video. There are so many fan games. Fan games that were driven by pure enjoyment, not just of Sonic. I mean, yes, Sonic, but not just of Sonic, but also just creating as a whole. And that is what this video is meant to celebrate. Unfortunately, for this video, I'm just gonna stick to 3 because I'd probably go nuts if I were to talk about all of my favorite games. And to start, I'm gonna talk about a game that's actually fairly popular, Sonic Time Twisted. Sonic Time Twisted released in 2017 and had been in development since 2005. That is a pretty long time to be committed to something like this. If you didn't believe that drive out of pure enjoyment stuff I was talking about earlier, I mean, here you have it. I actually remember when this game came out, but at the time I didn't have a way to play it. I was like, man, I must be missing out. And as someone who has now played this game multiple times, I missed out. On a basic level, it feels like a continuation of the classic formula, which is thematically appropriate. To me, this game sort of presents itself as this long-lost 32X game. The way the characters look, the way the levels look, the music. It clearly takes a lot of inspiration from the art style we saw in Knuckles Chaotix, which, to clarify, was the next 2D Sonic game on a console. And also the last one, I think, until Mania, I believe, not counting all those collections, which is kind of crazy to think about. Anyways, there's also inspiration from the anime depiction of Sonic from back then, with the cutscenes and Knuckles having his OVA hat, which yes, is something I believe he should have in every Sonic game. Hey, so actually, after looking over the footage, turns out Knuckles doesn't really have his OVA hat. He only has it in the save select, which, it's okay. I forgive you, Time Twisted. It's kind of it's a very heavy handle to have the hat in your game, and that's why Sonic Media doesn't tend to do it. But anyway, actually, you know what? Scratch that. It does count. It's there. It's in the save menu, which means you guys do get the points. So good job, guys. I think this goes to show how good they are at recreating this specific era of Sonic. Either they tricked me into thinking that Knuckles had his OVA hat, like it's just that much in the setting, or I'm just a dumbass, which is likely, but hey, my point still stands either way. Anyways, let's get back to the actual video before I continue to ramble and never stop. Yes, this is the art direction for the game, but I believe it actually goes much further than that. I think it's the actual direction for the entire game. Now, in order for this to be a direction, it can't just be the visuals of the game. It does also have to be the gameplay. But before I get into that, I want to clarify something. This vibe, style, direction I'm describing, this probably isn't the first game to do this, and it definitely wasn't the last. I mean, Mania literally exists, although I would argue that's more sadder than 32, but that's off topic. But I feel like this game deserves the credit because it does it so well. With the amount of time they put into this game, their understanding of what they're trying to go for is so clear. They seriously nailed it on the head. Now, I said the gameplay reflects the 32X presentation that they're trying to go for. What does that actually mean, right? Well, let me give you some examples. Firstly, the levels. Not only are they just good levels, but the level design also reflects off of what we saw in the previous games. This game attempts to combine 2 specific styles. The one from Sonic 3 and Knuckles, and the one from Sonic CD, and Time Twisted actually takes from all of these games for a very specific reason. A reason we'll get into later, but a reason that has to do with this game's core design philosophy. Now, another example that's actually kind of cool are the new shields in this game. There are 3 new shields on top of the older ones: the wind shield, the rock shield, and the ice shield. I mean, that just makes sense. It's fire, ice, it's water. Fire, water, electricity, and ice, rock, and wind. It all comes together. Also, the new shields are just really cool. The rock shield lets you shoot these rocks at enemies. Also, when you get hit, they fly off and hit everyone around you. The ice one freezes enemies, which is useful because enemies can be extra mean in this game. And the wind shield just lets you fly around. Yeah, crazy. Now, I guess that's kind of a minor example, but like I said, I just find that really cool. I guess a better example would be the actual main mechanic of this game. Not only does it conceptually make sense to be in classic Sonic, but it's just a really fun thing to do. The game is called Time Twisted, so I'm sure you expected time travel to pop up somewhere in here. Yeah, the time travel from Sonic CD comes back, except this time, there's a twist. In CD, there were 4 different versions of each level: the past, the present, the bad future, and the good future. In order to change the bad future to the good future, you needed to go from the present to the past and destroy the generator. However, this sort of brings up a conflict. There's no real reason to go to the future. The only reason you would is either by accident or just to look around, and I mean, I think that's part of the appeal. Just seeing how the world changes from period to period is kind of fun in its own way. It's that concept that Time Twisted plays with. There's only 2 time periods now: the past and the future. There are no generators, and there is no changing the future. The new idea is that whenever you do see a past or future sign, it usually means that a big ring is nearby in the other time period, which leads to a special stage. It's a good incentive, because not only are the Chaos Emeralds back, but so are the Time Stones. That's a total of 14 of these things to collect to get the good ending. And just in case that wasn't enough for you, they're actually harder to find in their respective time periods. Unless you're looking super intently, you're probably going to have a hard time finding these things normally. But when you do time travel, you'll see that there doesn't really need to be an incentive because of how easy and fun it is to do. All you gotta do is this, and then boom. It's so smooth that it feels wrong when you don't do it if you see one. And doing this really puts into perspective how well designed each level is. That concept of seeing what's changed when going from period to period in CD has been, it's been twisted here. Do you get it? I repeated the same joke, so. Before, it was how you changed time. Now, it's you seeing how time has changed. Overbound took advantage of this difference and used the time travel as a tool for world building. For example, the castle in Frigid Fortress zone was frozen over into a toxic wasteland in the future. Now, this is something you can kind of see in the background, but it's also something you can actually experience in gameplay. The castle's level design in the past isn't in the future. Instead, the areas are replaced with these giant orbs that function similarly to the ones from the Sonic 3 bonus stage. You know what I'm talking about. I assume this is like the toxic part of the toxic wasteland. Could you imagine seeing that in real life? Just a giant fucking orb of like whatever the fuck in the air instead of like your house. Like, that's fucking crazy. Stuff like that is not only really cool, but it's also a really good way of keeping the game engaging. And switching between these 2 level designs isn't jarring because the time travel is so fucking seamless and smooth. It's a really well thought out system. Like, mechanically, it's just really well done. It also just helps that the game is super aesthetically pleasing. You've seen the imagery, you've been hearing the music. I don't think I need to get into why. It's all pretty self-explanatory. I even already talked about the style a little bit. Like, just overall, graphically, it's just a really good looking game. Now, time traveling and experiencing this stuff is fun on its own, but it's not a hard goal like destroying the generators in CD. Time Twisted does have a similar type of goal, that being the special stages. I mentioned them before, but if they're not fun, then what's the point? Well, they are fun, and they actually might be some of my favorite special stages ever. It's a race against Metal Sonic in the shortest 3D level. The cool part about these is that you have full control over Sonic, meaning that the game gives you more control than usual with how you want to approach them. Taking shortcuts and cutting corners is much easier to do now. What also helps is that these levels are really well designed. There's enemies that can be hard to dodge. The shortcuts can be legitimately difficult to take sometimes. In fact, it actually makes cutting corners kind of an optimal way to beat these. That makes it sound like they're kind of difficult. They're really not that difficult, and I think that's good because, like I mentioned before, there's 14 of these, so you're going to be doing a lot of them. And on top of all of that, it has that feature where if you fail the special stage, it lets you use a life to redo it. And get this, I think this is one of the first Sonic games to do this, so fuck yeah, Time Twisted. Now, I'll fully admit, this does make the special stages much easier, but I mean, I don't know, man. They're just really fun. I guess the main appeal is that they're just video game levels, which, when I put it that way, it sounds funny, but I mean, that's fun. Video games are fun, so what can I say? It does what it wants to do super well, and I can't help but appreciate that. What I'm trying to get at is, Time Twisted is extremely good at being what it wants to be. It's got the style and direction of a game that only exists in a spin-off of said theoretical game. But not only does it capture that, it manages to go beyond it. I don't think it'd be right to credit all of this game's major ideas to a direction that, again, doesn't really exist. It takes things from that idea and even previous games, sure, but that's kind of how making video games work. It takes those ideas and builds its own identity from them, and that identity is really awesome. Eggman is dead during this story. It takes place during an alternate timeline where he died at the end of Sonic 3. Metal Sonic and his other robots are trying to revive him by using the Chaos Emeralds and Time Stones. That's a pretty crazy idea, but Sonic Time Twisted executes it, and it has a pretty fucking cool final boss for it. It uses its ideas in the best way possible. It could have felt disorganized or messy, but it doesn't. Instead, they all fit nicely together, like cogs in a clock. If you have yet to check out this game, why not? It's free. I mean, it's a free game. I mean, I don't know why you wouldn't. And to Overbound and all the folks behind this game, seriously, you did a good job here. The next game I'm going to talk about is Sonic 3D and 2D, a fan game that I've had a, quite frankly, crazy time with. Made by Sotaknuck and released in 2021, 3D and 2D is a 2D reimagining of Sonic 3D Blast, a game that has a lot of mixed reception behind it simply because of what it is, a 3D game in 2D. Now, I'm not saying it's bad, but because the game is the way it is, its approach to level design and gameplay is way different than any other Sonic game. I'm not going to get too much into it, but a lot of the level mechanics are more designed around level progression than just being there for the fun of it. This makes trying to speedrun a little harder than it would be in a normal Sonic game. Again, not to say it's a bad game, I actually remember liking 3D Blast for what it was, but it's not very appealing as a Sonic game. It's definitely not a Sonic game I tend to go back to. In fact, I didn't even go back to it for this video, and that's fine because I don't plan on comparing the two that closely. 3D and 2D is a very different game from 3D Blast anyways. I said reimagining because it doesn't really attempt to remake 3D Blast, but uses the game as a base to be its own game. To start with the most obvious difference, it's 2D, which means it already has to be a different game. 2D Sonic requires a specific kind of level design, so 3D Blast's levels can't really be translated into it. At most, it has to be something that lightly resembles it. As a result, the game, regardless of the creator's intentions, would have to become something different. However, I think the guy who made this had that in mind because 3D and 2D, despite the way 2D Sonic is, sort of attempts to inject a little bit of 3D Blast's DNA into its levels. That can mean a lot of different things, so let me show you an example of what I'm talking about. There was this point in Rusty Ruins Act 2 where I met this kind of roadblock before beating the level. These specific walls can only be broken when you're in the spinning animation from these spinner things. Now all of this is going to come together when you get to this specific wall in the level. Now from what you can see and from everything we've discussed, you may think that, oh wow, that's kind of difficult, how would I get through that area? And that may make you think initially, while playing, that it isn't the right way to go. Because Sonic games don't usually ask you to do those kind of things. Usually they're reserved for level secrets or something like that. But spoilers, it is the only way to progress the level. You'll find that the only way to get past this wall is with a very specific string of actions while spinning. And once you figure it out, you'll realize that it's not actually that hard to get through it, but this puzzle-like design isn't something you normally see in 2D Sonic. It's strange, but this kind of curveball gameplay is the game's way of adapting 3D Blast's progression-type levels into it. And all of the levels have them in some shape or form. Sometimes they'll come in the form of a puzzle or challenge, or sometimes they could come in the form of an area of the level being more maze-like. This is one of the game's more controversial elements. A lot of players not only don't know when one of these kind of curveballs are going to pop up, but a lot of people don't even know that the game's intentionally designed this way. Because yeah, like I said, Sonic games don't tend to do this kind of thing for the sake of pacing. But alternatively, I think it's a really interesting idea. Because, honestly, the level design is actually kind of fun. The Rusty Ruins segment I talked about before is a good example of that. It's challenging for sure, it even threw me off, but once I completed it, I felt genuinely accomplished in a way that Sonic games don't usually make me feel. Here's another example. Gene Gadget Zone has these tubes where depending on what direction you're holding, it'll change the path that Sonic is on. Pretty run of the mill. However, right before the boss of the first act, the game throws a series of tubes at you, and if you don't choose the correct path for each of them, you'll be kicked back to the start and have to try them again. It requires a little bit of memorization, yes, but it mostly requires good timing. Sonic's pretty fast in these tubes, so you gotta have good timing about when you switch. Tubes are in a lot of Sonic games, but we've never seen anything like this before. Instead of just having the mechanic there, the game tries to test your abilities and see if you're good at what the game is throwing at you. I find it to be a fun shakeup of what we usually get. A twist, if you will. Wrong game. And yeah, there's a trial and error aspect to it, but it's not punishing to the point of being cruel. The segment is super short, so having to restart it isn't that bad. In fact, it's that way with all of these little segments. The most the game makes you do is restart them, and on top of that, if you're good enough, you could still make it through them pretty fast. I'll admit, it's kind of a double-edged sword. It's sacrificing a bit of the pacing that's usually necessary, and in all fairness, that does hold the game back in regard to how Sonic games usually feel. At times, it can even feel like your progress is halted in a way. However, with this sacrifice comes some really interesting level design that I found to be fun, and for that reason, I think the change is worth it. It sort of challenges you in a way. I mean, it's challenging, but it also challenges you in what you perceive is allowed and not allowed in a Sonic game, you know? Not only is that interesting to me, but it's fun. I like it. I do also want to mention, this game is quite hard, at least for a Sonic game, and I know actually, as of recent, we have been getting some pretty challenging Sonic games with like the New Frontiers update and some of Superstar's stuff, but trust me, this game is hard on a different level. Not like oh it's flaming hot, but like it's just hard in a different way. So to clarify something, before we were talking about the game from a core design standpoint, now we're going to be talking about it from a difficulty standpoint. All of the level design I spoke about before were pretty hard for a Sonic game, but they all came with a fair catch, and that's the basis for what this difficulty is. It makes getting good super fun and intriguing. It almost has the same pull as a really tough action game. To explain what I mean, I'm gonna get into this game's boss fights, and according to the forums, they put you to the test. And I think that's kind of an understatement. Let's take a look at the first boss, 8-Bit Mecha Sonic. And I mean, come on, he comes from this baby game. What can he do? Well, what he could do is wreck your shit. Absolutely no mercy from this guy. Baby Mecha Sonic's attacks are fast and chaotic, and while hitting him does cancel out his attacks, his recovery time is short, meaning that it's not just about hitting him, but when you hit him. Now, a boss like this, it's not too bad, but reminder, this is the game's warning boss. Every other boss does indeed keep the same energy and then some. To clarify, they're not all scorchingly difficult, okay? They're still classic Sonic boss fights at their core. You can still gain the upper hand if they're left open, or if you're using a shield, and they're all relatively short with the exception of one boss, but I mean, hey, that boss is really awesome, so, you know, I'm letting it slide. But the point is, you're not going to be dying for like an hour. It's not that evil. It's more of the way they attack and how they leave themselves open that's changed. First of all, to address something small but notable, Sonic's invincibility frames have been decreased. So basically, you can get jumped if you're not careful. It's happened to me a few times. Usually you could use invincibility frames in the other games to get a few hits in. And while you still can do that sometimes, it's way more difficult now, so you need to be much more attentive. Most of these bosses are able to be hit at any time, but their attacks are hard hitting, so like the Mecha Sonic boss, you want to be careful when you do. It sounds like it can be a lot, but I mean, beating them is really fucking satisfying. It's the right kind of challenge where, yes, the game whoops your ass, but when I whoop the game's ass, I feel really good. It also helps that the bosses themselves are just super cool. I'm about to do something kind of weird. I'm gonna leave a spoiler warning here because the mini bosses I'm about to talk about are really that cool. Trust me, if you're interested in this game and you want to go in a little blind, I'd suggest skipping to this point. But otherwise, you know, stick around. I don't know. 3D and 2D adds its own mini-bosses for every level, and they're all just fan service. And it's not just good fan service, but it's fan service that actually makes sense. Tails Doll, Metal Knuckles, Fanged Up, Hunter. Not only are these bosses cool cameos, but them being here actually makes sense for the time of the game. Yes, because the characters were created at this time, but also because, story-wise, Eggman probably would have been interacting with them at this point in the timeline. I know that sounds kind of nerdy, but you're just gonna have to let me make the video, please. But also on top of that, we never really got to see these characters in full action outside of like Sonic R and extremely recently. I don't know, I guess it's just really nice to have them here. On top of them, we just have original concepts that stay in that theme. There's a boss fight where you fight an egg robo that just heavily resembles Alpha from Sonic Adventure, and that conceptually just makes sense because, you know, they're the next line of egg robots, and I mean, my brain, it just makes sense. It's so good. This game was the last mainline Sonic game before Sonic Adventure, not counting Chaotix. I don't even know if people consider that a mainline Sonic game. This game actually links itself with Sonic Adventure quite a few times. It's sort of implied throughout the game that this is meant to be the last classic story in the timeline. I think that's kind of a cool way to shake up the game because, you know, the original story was just about these flickies. Now there's actual context behind what this game is meant to represent. It also gives a little bit of a reason as to why these bosses are so hard. You know, this is meant to be the final chapter of this era of Sonic. It makes sense that he'd go way harder than before. And don't. I may be dragging it now, but the point is that there's a lot of thought behind these Easter eggs, and I just really appreciate it. I think Sonic media tends to have a lot of references and cameos, but not for a particular reason. I mean, you know, fan service for the sake of having fan service, again, it's great, but I do think that 3D and 2D does it better. It's a good example of fan service that's more meaningful, and I think official Sonic can take a lot from that. There's 3 other boss fights I could go into, but for the sake of not spoiling some of this game's best moments, I'm not going to. Yes, this is a double spoiler warning right here, except I'm just gonna not even talk about it. And the fact that they're not just really cool, but they're also really fun to learn, makes this game really fun to play. You know, listening back, I said the word fun a lot there. I hope that kind of shows, and because they're all interesting ideas, it motivates me to actually try and beat them, even when some of them whoop my ass. That egg robo is really fucking obnoxious, and Metal Knuckles can be kinda hard your first few times around, and the boss after Metal Knuckles is actually insane if you don't take a flame shield with you. I mean, I beat it without it, but like, damn. You know, I think the only part about this that can feel genuinely unfair is when you lose all of your lives. You gotta restart the zone, which can suck. They aren't usually too long, even despite the way the game's designed, but I will admit, I can understand why that could be frustrating for someone. Even I needed to take a few breaks. There's a reason why Sonic games tend to not use lives anymore. But I still pulled through, I still enjoyed myself, and I'm gonna tell you now, I'm not some invincible Sonic soldier that just happens to be good at all of the games. Okay? I'm gonna be completely honest with you. This game isn't gonna be for everyone. There are a lot of changes that people who are Sonic fans aren't going to be used to. It's hard to talk about games like this. However, if you do feel that way, I still ask you to try it. When I first played this game, I didn't know what I was in for, so you could imagine my reactions to these bosses absolutely whooping my ass. But I was like, fine, okay, the bosses are a little hard, it's cool, I'll figure it out. And then I reached the first special stage, and I mean, damn, look at these. If you hated half-pipes before, you're probably reaching for the closest weapon in your environment. These are probably some of the most evil special stages I've ever seen. And they're not bad, but they do look really tough. So I went onto the itch.io forums to see if I could get some help, because yes, you know, it's not optional. I do need to get all the Chaos Emeralds in every Sonic game I play, don't ask why. And Sotaknuck had responded to someone having similar troubles. And to summarize what they said, yeah, Sonic's pretty slippery, but the special stages provide 3 times the amount of rings needed to win. And I mean, with all things considered and comparing that to Sonic 2's special stages, that's pretty forgiving. At that point, all you need to do is create strategies around the ring patterns, and once I realized it was that simple, they were all really easy. And if that wasn't enough for you, there's only 5 of them, because you do get 2 of them automatically. That is the sort of mindset that this game tries to give you, if that makes any sense. For every level that challenges you and for every difficult boss, there's something on your side, whether that be something in the game or something that the player needs to figure out. And I think that's a really smart way to design a game. So again, the game may not be for everyone, but with the amount of cool shit that's in it, I seriously suggest you try it. I didn't even get into the amount of playable characters there are, and let me tell you, all of them have unique playstyles. A few of them even have their own level segments, so I mean, just go check it out. It's awesome, it's fun. And to Sotaknuck, you did a good job. This is honestly fire. For the last game, we have yet another version of a previous game, except this time it's more of a remake. Sonic Triple Trouble 16-bit, made by Noah and Copeland and released in 2022, is exactly what it sounds like, a full 16-bit remake of Sonic Triple Trouble. And my first question when learning about this fan game is, Why Triple Trouble? Well, from what I could gather, it seems like it was chosen because it was the most Genesis-like 8-bit Sonic game, and that Genesis connection is the basis for this game. It's almost like a what-if scenario where Sega saw this golden potential in the Triple Trouble concept and decided to make one last Genesis game with it. It's kind of funny. It's like an alternate approach to what Time Twisted went with, except instead it's a remake of an older game. Okay, so that Genesis flavor, right? What we know the Sega Genesis for, what we know Sonic 1, 2, 3, 4, that is all over this game. I mean, just look at this game in a 4:3 aspect ratio. Tell me you wouldn't think this is a ROM hack or something. And by the way, you actually can put it in a 4:3 aspect ratio in the game. Like, that is an option that the game allows. Also, these sprites are a really obvious pointer. I mean, they come straight out of Sonic 3 and Knuckles. The color grading especially does a really good job at replicating the look. Even the trailers just display this. I mean, I do want to preface, I wasn't born in the 90s, so I don't know what ads looked like then. But, I mean, you can't tell me that this doesn't look similar to the Genesis ads. Like, I've seen them. These give off a kind of similar vibe. Anyways, what I'm trying to say is that it's impressive how well they did this style here. The music, as you would expect, sounds very much like the music from the previous games. And well, the music in those games fucking slapped, so now the music being great is awesome, but it also has to fit what it's going for. Part of the reason why these levels are so memorable to us is because of the music. It sets the tone for how these levels are meant to feel, and even how you're meant to play. This game uses that concept phenomenally. A great example of this is from one of my favorite levels, Sunset Park, and like, holy shit, we have an upbeat, catchy rhythm in the first act, then we move on to the second act with that goddamn swing, like, holy shit. And Act 3, it's just straight up cinematic. I'm pretty sure this song was also in the original, so it's like remixed, and it sounds so good here. I have so much to say about this level. We're gonna get into it later. You know, listening back, I was very hyped. Right there. But it's because all of the music here is really good, but they genuinely fit the aesthetic that this level is trying to paint. It adds on to the imagery and makes it an absolutely beautiful set piece. And the fact that every level has stuff like this is insane to me. These levels are just overall a joy to play through. Now, I didn't play the original, so I couldn't tell you how the levels are in that game, although I'm confident they're fun enough, but regardless, it seems like a lot of this stuff had to be recreated anyways. And if they did stay super close to the original, then we wouldn't have gotten these honestly incredible levels. I'm not even exaggerating. These are some of the most well-designed levels I've ever seen. Now, that isn't to say the other games I talked about before don't or anything. Quite the opposite, in fact, and I hope all that talking I did before made that clear. The games I talked about before had concepts and mechanics to back up their levels. Time Twisted had its really fun time travel system, and 3D and 2D had its really interesting and creative difficulty. I know those are vague ways of describing those concepts, but I just spent like 2/3 of this video describing it, so I'm just gonna let it go, but you know what I'm trying to say. Triple Trouble doesn't have stuff like that to back itself up. I mean, you could switch between Sonic and Tails, which is pretty cool, but that doesn't really fundamentally change the gameplay all that much. In fact, you can basically go through the entire game without doing it. This means that Triple Trouble's level design has to stand out on its own, and I mean, it does. Every level is here to show the player something, whether that be some really fun level mechanics or their amazing set pieces. And what I mean by set pieces is the spectacle. I mean, you know, the moments where you're just like, holy shit, this is cool. But I want to clarify, it's not just something you watch. They're balanced with genuinely engaging gameplay. Take my favorite act for my favorite level. Sunset Park Act 3, yes, this is when I talk about it. This level set piece is the entire level, I guess. You run on the train tracks, and then you jump on the train, and then you see this beautiful sunset later on. It's just amazing. I love it. Just being here is enough for me, but the game does more to make sure that the player is focused. In the original, the train itself was the main mechanic. In fact, it sort of served as the boss of the previous act, with how you need to destroy the engine at the end, which you still gotta do here. However, the remake transforms this train into something that instead holds level mechanics, like how there's an actual level on the train now, or like how Fang starts shooting you from the foreground, or how this fireball chases you partway through. The train is still center stage here, but everything else is hyping it up. It manages to have a main gimmick without being a gimmick level, which is still something that Sonic games tend to struggle with today, and that's not a dig at other Sonic games. It's just hard to balance spectacle with engagement. See, levels in classic Sonic don't usually have a lot of spectacle, so when they do, it can feel super exciting and unique. It's why moments like snowboarding down ice caps, or literally every final boss in this series stands out so much. The game does this a lot, but it's also paced really well. After the train level, the game slows down and lets you run through this forest level. Then you get on the ship and then you fucking blow it up, but then the game slows down again and you go into the snow level, but then the game ramps up again and you're suddenly snowboarding down another mountain in this semi 3D segment where this avalanche is chasing you, and it's like, what the fuck? With the amount of crazy shit that happens in this game, usually it'd be too much. But like I mentioned before, not only is it paced super well, but the spectacle has the player involved. It's what keeps the game fun, so I have to give Noah the credit. It's just a really well-designed system. We haven't even gotten into the actual original content yet. Not only is the new stuff really cool, but it feels like it all serves a genuine purpose. And if that sounds familiar, it's because yes, I actually did say something similar about 3D and 2D. In fact, I'm actually about to use that game as an example for something. Before I talked about how because that game was a transformation between two different types of gameplay, it resulted in the game going in a completely different direction, meaning that there had to be a lot of original content to substitute for the lack of old content. In the case for Triple Trouble's remake, it's a small game being expanded into a bigger game. Now it's less about substituting stuff and more about adding stuff. This could have been done by just adding more levels, which isn't a bad idea. In fact, there is actually one extra level put in here, but I think it goes with a much smarter idea for this case, and that's just by giving what already exists more depth. I already mentioned this, but yeah, the levels. A lot of the content from the original was taken, of course, like some of the mechanics and the setting, but other than that stuff, most of it had to be completely overhauled. I mean, I'm sure you could find some similarities in the level design, but I can guarantee that a bunch of this stuff is new. There's way more mechanics in these levels. The music is new, which I already mentioned. There's some amazing set pieces here, which I already talked about. What haven't I talked about yet? Oh, the boss fights. I haven't talked about the boss fights yet. Don't get me started on these fucking boss fights. Like, haha, that little turtle isn't fooling fucking anyone. We all know that there's a fucking bigger one hiding somewhere. You know, because I came in with a lot of energy and I wasn't prepared to keep that energy. From what I could see, most of these bosses are actually similar to what we got before, just changed to be more attuned to what we normally see. I mean, of course, outside of things like that turtle I just mentioned, that whole train segment I went on about earlier, and this super dope boss that I am going to get into later. However, some of the changes have been made to just expand upon stuff we haven't seen much of, like having both Knuckles and Fang as mini bosses for every level so we get to see them more often. The Fang bosses are pretty much the ones from the special stages in the original, probably upgraded in some way I don't know about, which is totally cool. The Knuckles bosses, however, are specifically really awesome because they expand upon what we saw from Sonic 3. And yes, I just said expand again. I've said expand a lot. Get fucking used to it. We do a lot of expanding here. He's chucking bombs, throwing boulders, dashing, diving. He's not fucking around anymore. And when we do get to the original Knuckles boss, not only is it twisted with it being combined with the submarine section, but it's here to show the game's genuine, actual twist. Spoilers, by the way. Skip here if you want to try this game. You should try this game, so try this game. Okay, I'm gonna talk about it now. Boom. That's right. See, originally, the reason for Knuckles being here was because he was tricked again, which doesn't really make sense, especially with how the remake implies that it takes place right after Sonic 3. So Noah came up with a pretty smart plot change. That being, it's not Knuckles, it's Metal Sonic. This is seriously so fucking cool, and what follows is a seriously cool mid-air boss fight. Dog, come on now. And Metal Sonic was in the original game, but he kinda just popped in. Now it all comes together. The real Triple Trouble is Eggman, Fang, and Metal Sonic. And Metal's boss fight in the last level is such a cool expansion off the original. Again, I said expansion, I'm repeating a lot, just let it go, we expand a lot. It feels like a proper, non-moving version of a Metal Sonic boss. This also now leaves room for a playable Knuckles, where yes, not only does he get his own original level segments, but he gets a few exclusive boss fights at the end of the game. First, you get a gauntlet of Fang bosses, then you get a Metal Sonic boss where they start swapping between their own moveset, and Knuckles is one, which is just so fucking cool, and then Knuckles gets a final boss that's dedicated to his moveset alone. Like, how cool is that? Also, very small thing, but all of this game's main stories actually connect to each other very well. This time around, only Sonic and Tails get the Chaos Emeralds, and not Knuckles, which actually makes sense. That's still something we tend to get kind of confused about with normal Sonic games. All of the other playable characters are available in this free play specific mode, and yes, there are other unlockable characters, other than Amy, who's available from the get-go and has 3 different movesets for you to choose from. Let's tread back to the Chaos Emeralds though. The special stages are really fun. They're actually pretty similar conceptually to the stages in Time Twisted, racing against Fang to get the Chaos Emeralds. Fang instead of Metal Sonic, that is. This time, however, it's got the decision-making of Mania's special stages. You have to juggle between either getting rings, because they act as a timer, or just electrocuting Fang so he doesn't catch up with you. It's also just a really fun thing to do, so sometimes it's just something you're gonna want to do every now and then. I'm telling you now in advance. Some of these special stages will try to catch you off guard with its obstacles and platforming challenges, so they can fuck you up, but they never get too hard, and that's on top of not having to collect every emerald, and again having that special stage replay thing at the cost of lives. Thank God we've normalized this in Sonic games. You know, it's kind of funny. It's kind of a mix between the 2 previous special stages I talked about before. Some say I'm a bit of a mastermind. Not all, but some do. Getting all the Chaos Emeralds gets you what is, in my opinion, one of the coolest final bosses in a Sonic game. I'm not gonna spoil it for you, but man, it is just so insane. I mean, this whole game is insane, but if you're looking for a motivation to play this game, this would be the motivation. It is that good. It's all to say that this game is just overall really well designed. I think it's just so cool that we live in a time where we get Sonic games that can keep up with the official stuff we have now. I mean, I guess I don't have anything else to say. Just play it so you can experience something really stellar. And to Noah, you did a really good job here. Seriously, this is awesome. And it's free. The game is free. I mean, obviously, you probably already know that. So, but I mean, go play it. What I said before about how cool it is that fan games are keeping up with the original stuff, that goes for everything here. I found something unique to value in all of these games. The reason I chose to talk about these 3 specifically is because I play them like they're normal Sonic games. They are, in fact, some of my favorite Sonic games out there. The people who make these games understand the concepts behind game development, behind Sonic, and behind creating. I didn't even get to talk about all of the cool shit in them. I mean, I talked about a lot of it, but not all of it. Like, for example, all of these games have sick as hell final bosses that I didn't even get to go into, because it's worth more than my video. It's worth a personal experience. And I'll say it again, it's all behind the pure passion and dedication these people have for making stuff like this. And what's crazy is that I've only talked about these games, and these are only some of the 2D Sonic fan games out there, and specifically the popular 2D Sonic fan games. There are so many more out there, so many more I probably don't even know about. And what's even crazier is that there are hundreds of other video game series that have fan games of their own. And for every fan work that exists, there are people behind it. People who will create more of their own work, whether that be fan-made stuff or something original. And we're living in a time where we could see that stuff come alive actively. There are so many internet forums and social media pages dedicated to this stuff. It's awesome. It's one of the best parts about the internet, other than like saving people and a lot of other stuff, but still, it's honestly inspiring. So to you all, you're doing an awesome job. Keep it up. Hey guys, thanks for making it this far. That is to the end of the video, which is very nice of you considering how long it is. Also, finally got this fucking video done. Firstly, I want to actually give you guys something to do. If you want to, go in the comments and suggest a fan game of your own that you really enjoy, because, you know, it's super awesome to share this kind of stuff. And that also includes people who are making fan games. If you want to promote your fan game, or really anything that you're making, obviously I don't really have a preference, but you know, I'm talking fan games right now because this is a video about fan games. But if you want to put that down in the comments, maybe shed some light on that, hey, go ahead. You know, that's what this video is for. It's to appreciate that kind of stuff. Second message is to thank all you guys for watching that previous video I made. I actually really wasn't expecting it to get as much attention as it did at the time. And I know everybody says that, right, when they get a video that gets like some attention, but I'm telling you guys, like, I made that video, I uploaded it, I'm like, yeah, no one's gonna see this, and I'm okay with that, because I wasn't making it for that to be like the video, like, I was like, this is just a video and I've been stuck on it, I'm just gonna release it. But it got a fair amount of attention, and I'm glad that it did. I appreciate everyone who stuck around for that video, and I appreciate the comments too. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching the video. That's about it, I guess. I'm gonna stop before I continue to go on forever. See you guys in whatever I do next.